Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Some Magnetic Force, Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald Writings. And this is Michael Parke-Taylor in conversation with Saelan Twerdy. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, and we are live from fourth space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. Running today's event is a live stream Zoom meeting, so anyone joining us there, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat. Those of you here in the space, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you so Michael and everyone else can hear. But with that, it's now my pleasure to hand it over to our host here in the space for today, editor and author based in Montreal, Saelan Twerdy. Saelan, welcome.
Thanks for that introduction, Doug. Hello, Michael. I'm so glad that you can join us via telephone today for this unconventional live streamed video presentation of our discussion about Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald.
So, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be with you and your Fourth Space audience today.
All right. So just so everyone in the audience and watching knows what's going to happen, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to Fitzgerald, and then Michael, I'll introduce you, and then we can have a short conversation followed by a discussion about some works that we have borrowed today from the collection of the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery, 4 drawings that they hold of Fitzgerald's. So let's get started. Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald was an artist and educator and the only member of the Group of 7 who was based in Western Canada. Although he accepted the Group of 7's invitation to become a member in 1932, Fitzgerald was less concerned than the rest of the group with the promotion of a unified Canadian identity. Instead, he explored his surroundings, delving deeply into the forces he felt animated and united nature in order to make the picture a living thing. And that is a quote actually from Michael Parke-Taylor. So Fitzgerald was born in 1890 in Winnipeg. He left school at age 14 with a grade 8 education, which was not unusual at the time for families who didn't expect to send their children to university. He worked as an office boy and a clerk for various businesses, and in his spare time began to draw and paint regularly. He signed up for a winter of evening classes at the A.S. Castelli School of Fine Arts, and after his marriage to Felicia Wright, in 1912, he determined to work as an artist while taking on a variety of jobs to support his family. He arranged window displays, did freelance interior decorating, and painted theater backdrops. In 1913, he exhibited at the Royal Canadian Academy, and around 1915 started applying Impressionist concepts to his work. A work of his, Late Fall Manitoba, was purchased by the National Gallery of Canada in 1918, and he received his first solo exhibition in 1921 at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. His style started to really solidify in the early 20s, in the winter of 1921 to 22. He spent at the Art Students League of New York and began to develop his signature, mature, precisionist style. He started teaching in 1924 at the Winnipeg School of Art, and in 1929 he became the principal. This position inspired him to travel more widely, researching programs throughout North America, which resulted in the travel diary that is collected in Some Magnetic Force. So in 1930, Fitzgerald exhibited his work with the Group of 7 in 2 shows. They invited him to join in 1932 after the death of J.E.H. MacDonald, and he was chosen unanimously, but he only exhibited as a member once before the group disbanded and reformed as the Canadian Group of Painters in 1933, which, as some may know, was a collective of 28 painters from across Canada who were active until the mid-50s. So, in 1947, Fitzgerald took a leave of absence from his position as director at the Winnipeg School of Art, and with time to concentrate on his artwork, he began a series of still lifes and charted a path towards greater abstraction, which I think we'll be able to see some examples of in the works from the Ellen Gallery. He died in 1956. And now, an introduction from Michael Parke-Taylor. Michael Parke-Taylor is an art historian based in Toronto. He received his art historical training at the University of Toronto and the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. His first curatorial position was at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. Following this, he spent the majority of his professional career as a curator at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where he worked for 23 years in the print and drawing department and the European department, before becoming curator of modern art in the modern and contemporary department, a position from which he retired in 2011. Parke-Taylor has organized numerous thematic and monographic exhibitions, embracing a wide range of 19th and 20th century European artists, including Edvard Munch, André Derain, André Masson, and Henry Moore. He's published articles and reviews in Racar, Print Quarterly, and Cahiers du Musée National d'Art Moderne. He published a monograph on Fitzgerald, Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald, Life and Work, with the Art Canada Institute in 2017, and of course edited Some Magnetic Force, Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald Writings with Concordia University Press in 2023. This year, he curated the retrospective exhibition and wrote the accompanying book for the exhibition Bertram Brooker, When We Awake, at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in Kleinburg, Ontario. So let's give a warm welcome to Michael Parke-Taylor, who is of course joining us remotely, but can hear your applause. So, Michael, my first question for you is, you curated an exhibition of Fitzgerald's work at the Winnipeg Art Gallery in 1988. And around that time, you began work on a book about Fitzgerald's writing in collaboration with the scholar and curator Liz Wiley. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how you first became involved with Fitzgerald's work and writing. What was it that drew you to Fitzgerald?
Yes, indeed, Saelan. My initial interest actually goes back to the early 80s when I was curator at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. I happened to have the entire works of paper collection in my office. My office was small enough that it was all held in a map cabinet. And so I had ready access to the gallery's small but very nice holdings of Fitzgerald's prints, drawings, and watercolors. There was a chap on staff by the name of Kevin Forrest, who was an art educator. And Kevin had just finished writing a master's thesis on Fitzgerald's prints for Carleton University in 1979. So we would chat about Fitzgerald from time to time, and I really came to love his work. Carol Phillips was the director of the Mackenzie Art Gallery at that time, and in the mid-'80s, she became the director of the Winnipeg Art Gallery. They initiated a Fitzgerald exhibition looking at the late work of his career, and had invited Dr. Ted Thomas, who was Fitzgerald's dealer and personal physician, and Helen Coy, who's director of the Fitzgerald Study Center at the University of Manitoba, and author of the catalog raising of Fitzgerald's prints. They were meant to curate this show. However, Ted became ill and had to pull out, and so did Helen. And so the exhibition was turned over to me. Carol invited me to take over from them. And the show was eventually called In Seclusion with Nature. I did have an opportunity to interview Ted, who sadly passed away before the show took place. But he was able to give me very valuable firsthand information about Fitzgerald. It was really a time when there were still people around who knew him. Also, at that time, I was already good friends with the art historian Liz Wiley. And at that time, Liz was the curator of the art collection at the University of Toronto. She wrote a brilliant master's thesis for Concordia titled The Development of Spirituality in the Work of Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald in 1981. Liz was of great assistance to me while I was researching the Winnipeg exhibition. And then after the show, we thought that it would be worth trying to publish Fitzgerald's writings, which we had both come to admire. But unfortunately, we were both so preoccupied with our curatorial responsibilities that we couldn't bring a publication to fruition, although we did quite a bit of legwork.
So it was quite a while later that you came back to Fitzgerald to publish your monograph with the Art Canada Institute. And I wonder sort of how much was he on your mind in the intervening years, and sort of what brought you back to him in, it was 2019 that your monograph, or 2017 that your monograph came out with ACI?
Yeah, it was in 2017. Actually, most of my career I was spent, dealing with European art, not Canadian art. So I really didn't have too much time to think about Fitzgerald. But after I retired, it was a bit serendipitous. I received a message right out of the blue. I think it was 2016 from Anna Hudson, who's an art history professor at York University, and also the commissioning editor for the Art Canada Institute. And Anna asked if I would like to write a book on Fitzgerald for their online monograph series. So I said to her, if I can retrieve all my notes from the Art Gallery of Ontario, where I had left them in 3 Solander boxes, I would be happy to do so. So I was able to do that. And the book eventually appeared in 2017 and was followed up with a hardcover version in 2019.
Okay. And so then can you tell us a little bit about how Some Magnetic Force was initiated? Were you sort of after, on the heels of that publication, were you immediately sort of brought back to your idea of publishing a book of his writings?
Yes, well, actually, after the ACI book was published, I was invited by the McMichael Canadian Art Collection to collaborate on a retrospective exhibition of Fitzgerald that opened in 2019. I wrote for the catalog, and among some of the writings I did for the catalog was a specific essay looking at his 1930 diary. That diary chronicles a month-long trip he made to the States, visiting art schools and art museums. My feeling that this was a unique document in the annals of Canadian art history that really needed to see the light of day. The diary is really at the center of all his writings. It's a fascinating look at what was happening in the art world in the United States just as the Great Depression was beginning to hit. And yet there was this moment when, excuse me, many art institutions were beginning to install their post-impressionist and modern collections. And I'm thinking here particularly of the Art Institute of Chicago, which had just installed the Birch Bartlett collection, which featured Seurat's famous painting, A Sunday on La Grange-at 1884, which Fitzgerald saw in 1930. And then he travels to Washington and New York, and he sees works by Cézanne in person for the first time. And Cézanne was perhaps the most important influence on Fitzgerald's entire career. So seeing his works in the flesh and his response to that is knowledge that I feel is of central importance to our historians.
Mm-hmm, I agree. I also think that the travel diary is really the centerpiece of this book of writings. And it seems to me that you are quite familiar with Fitzgerald's writings already. I wonder if when you started to put the material together for assembly in the book, if you came across anything that still surprised you at that point.
Maybe not surprise, but I think maybe delight is the word to use. I was really delighted that the writings, when collected, offered a really coherent and I think nuanced picture of what Fitzgerald was all about. Fitzgerald writes in plain style. In other words, in a very direct way, without a lot of flowery language or jargon. His message is very clear and easy to understand. But I will mention something about the letters that came up as the book was developing, which may be of interest. These were the letters that Irene Haywood Hemsworth received from Fitzgerald in the early 40s. Now, she had been a student at the Winnipeg School of Art, and after she graduated, had an affair with Fitzgerald. She moved from Brandon to Toronto, and while there, Fitzgerald sent her a series of fascinating personal letters. I was able to interview Irene for the 1988 Winnipeg show. She told me about the letters, but she did not show them to me. She died shortly thereafter, and after her death, her husband, Wade Hemsworth, who you may know is a famous Canadian folk songwriter, he sent the whole lot to me. So I transcribed them, and then I sent the letters to Library and Archives Canada, where they are now included with her archive. Anyway, one of the letters included very explicit references to their relationship. And I was sort of two minds whether this material should be included in the book. But Jeffrey Little, the editor of the Concordia series, convinced me that it should be published. The full context of Fitzgerald's writings to Irene really add to a fuller picture of his humanity, his passion, and not just the persona that is often given to us of Fitzgerald as this shy, reclusive, and somewhat saintly introvert.
Yeah, when I read the book, I was very surprised by the intimacy of their correspondence, because they're love letters and they're erotic. And it's almost a little bit surprising that her husband was the one that sent them to you for posterity. But that's an interesting vote of confidence on his part, I think, for their historical importance.
Yes, and Oliver Botar, who's a scholar at the University of Manitoba, wrote an essay for the McMichael catalog, which really delves into eroticism in Fitzgerald's work, and I think is related to the letters. So your audience might want to check out Oliver's essay, which is excellent.
Ah, good tip. Thank you. So the writings in Some Magnetic Force, I think, provide a really vivid window into the social reality of being a regional Canadian artist in Fitzgerald's period, so the 30s to the 50s roughly. And I think they have a lot of historical interest for scholars and curators, anyone with an interest in Fitzgerald's work and his milieu. But I do think that they stand on their own as something with literary merit, and I wonder what you think his writings might have to offer to a broader or more general art readership in 2024?
Yes, first of all, I'd say that the voice of the artist is always important, no matter from what era. And I think how artists articulate their concerns gives us important insights and pathways into the interpretation of their work. And it's not just what they say, but the way they say it, which offers us understanding, in this case, who Fitzgerald was as a person. Now, if we look at the history of publishing in Canada, there have been very few books that record the writings of Canadian artists. And that's why the Text Context series initiated by Concordia University Press has been so valuable, whether it be a contemporary artist or a historical artist like Fitzgerald. For those interested in historical Canadian art, it's rare to find books concerned with artists active during the first half of the 20th century that focus on their writings. So having an entire book of writings devoted to Fitzgerald becomes something special. And what makes Some Magnetic Force even more important is that most of Fitzgerald's texts in this volume have never been printed before. He didn't write for posterity, as did Lawrence Harris, for example. So to be able to read his letters to associates, friends, and even his lover, to be able to know the contents of his lectures to students and reports to the board at the Winnipeg School of Art, and of course the diary I mentioned is very valuable. As we know, Fitzgerald was a member of the Group of Seven for a brief period before they disbanded. His practice was quite different from theirs, although he called himself a kindred spirit. It was in 1995 that National Gallery of Canada curator Charlie Hill curated a blockbuster exhibition called The Group of Seven, Art for a Nation. This was an incredible show, and I still use the catalog on an almost daily basis, really first-rate scholarship. But this show became controversial as many academics and art historians did not feel that the group, with their nationalistic sentiment, represented an art for a nation as they espoused a colonial ideology connected to white settler culture in Canada. Now, Fitzgerald poses an interesting case because here is an artist working in the relative isolation of Winnipeg, on the margins of art being produced in Toronto and Montreal, for example, who is nationalistic, but not in the Group of Seven sense. He does not write about his art or consider it in the context of nationalistic rhetoric, although, he was a proud Canadian. The title of our book, Some Magnetic Force, by the way, refers to a comment he made that Canada must have some magnetic force holding artists here, where there are few advantages, rather than finding greener fields in the United States. It's interesting to note that even Bertram Brooker in the late 20s wrote that the Group of Seven were contemporary, but not modern, which he defined as those artists who stemmed from Cézanne. And he would have put Fitzgerald in this category, separating him from the Group of Seven. At any rate, on the question of an artist working on the margins, I wrote about this to an art historian colleague who, by the way, hails from Winnipeg. And even though it's clear that Fitzgerald was working at a distance from the large urban centers, my friend took issue with me suggesting that Fitzgerald was a modernist working in isolation. His take was that Winnipeg was far more cosmopolitan at that time than many give credit. And in fact, Winnipeg was the third largest city in Canada in 1911. But there's no question that Fitzgerald did not have the same opportunities as his fellow artists in Montreal or Toronto in terms of exhibition possibilities or patronage. It may be that some artists working in Western Canada may still feel this way, although they do not experience the same isolation working in our contemporary interconnected world. I think it's quite likely that artists working in Toronto feel isolated, given the fractured nature of the contemporary art world, and thus may feel some resonance with Fitzgerald's writings. I think one of the best sections of Some Magnetic Force is the chapter that includes his lectures and miscellaneous notes on art from the period 1933 to 35. Of course, the curriculum at the Winnipeg School of Art was very different from what is taught today, for example, drawing from plasters of classical statuary. The goal for many students during Fitzgerald's period was to use art school training to enter the world of commercial art. Fitzgerald's own background included working in commercial ventures before he went to art school in New York. And as you know, virtually all the group of seven, with the exception of Warren Harris, worked in commercial enterprises to make money at the beginning of their careers. For Fitzgerald, drawing was the key, and he felt that all artists should be trained to the highest level in drawing and design, whether or not they were to seek employment in the commercial field. The one thing that he stressed to his students was to combine a study of nature with studying works of art. The idea was that by searching nature and great works of art, the student would come to a better understanding of self. And certainly the notion of a better understanding of self is something that artists continually seek, only now it's from many different, personal identity and political perspectives. Nonetheless, I think Fitzgerald's words still ring true today for us because our basic sense of humanity, a need to understand self and the world, has not changed.
Thank you so much, Michael. You just made so many good points. I think that you touched on a whole bunch of things that I thought were interesting and relevant in his writings about the distinction between fine and commercial art, about teaching and arts pedagogy, about what attention to nature has to offer to artists, and about working as a regional artist or an artist outside of a major urban center, or I think also the point about Winnipeg being maybe actually more cosmopolitan than people thought is also a really good point. So thank you so much for that. I think that it's maybe getting to a time when we should start to talk a little bit about the drawings that we have here with us today. So the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery was kind enough to lend us. We have 3 drawings here today, and then I think we just have a reproduction that we can put up on the screen of a 4th one, which is unframed and so a little too fragile to bring in here. But the works that we have with us are from 1936, Flower, Stalk, and Vase, which is to my left here, and then 2 abstract compositions, one from 1954 right here, and one from 1956. And then the work that is unfortunately not in the space with us at this moment is Side Porch from 1948. And I remember when you and I were speaking in advance of this conversation, you said that you thought that these works were really nicely illustrative of the sort of span and range of Fitzgerald's work and his sort of path of development. And so I wonder, where would you like to start talking about these?
Sure. Let's start with the earliest work there, the Flower, Stalk, and Vase from 1936, which is a great example of Fitzgerald's dictum that a work of art is a living thing. What a beautiful and exquisite work to show the power of drawing based on close observation. I mean, drawing was really at the heart of Fitzgerald's artistic enterprise, and you can take this right back to his youthful beginnings when he was inspired by reading Ruskin to look at nature, from an empirical perspective. This delicate plant study dates from 36, and I'm not sure if you've got the comparative images there, but there was a 1937 drawing that I mentioned from the Winnipeg Art Gallery, which is very, very similar. Both these works, they show that he really loved to look at the minutiae of nature. And interestingly enough, the Concordia drawing was done just before Fitzgerald was visited by Bertram Brooker in July 1936. And I have no doubt that Fitzgerald showed Brooker his pencil drawings from this period. And they were to inspire Brooker, who also made very delicate drawings of plants from nature at the very end of his career. And, in some cases, his drawings have been mixed up with Fitzgerald's. But it was really, he learned a tremendous amount from Fitzgerald. And I think this drawing is a really good example of exactly the kind of work that Brooker would have been responding to.
Mm-hmm. Doug, were we able to get those?
Can we talk about the side porch at all, or is there a slide of it, or?
Oh yeah, I would still love to talk about side porch. We have documentation of it here up on a screen. We just don't have it with us physically.
Okay. Okay, great. That's a really an interesting picture because it's the side porch of Fitzgerald's house, his residence at 160 Lyle Street, which is located in the St. James district of Winnipeg. If you know Winnipeg, it's west of downtown and just north of the Assiniboine River. A lovely, lovely neighborhood. And he lived there from 1924 until his death in '56. He used many of the urban scenes from his neighborhood in his art. For example, a painting called Pritchard's Fence and Williamson's Garage. But these subjects were simply vehicles to explore the formal elements of composition, line and color. Fitzgerald really wanted to find an underlying unity of forms behind the appearance of nature. But looking at side porch, you can compare it to, if you have a slide of Doc Snyder's house, it is on the very right side of the picture. You can see the same porch. And what's interesting too about the drawing is that it's done with little dots of ink, like so many magnetic iron filings. And it's possible that this pointillist technique was first inspired by looking at Seurat at the Art Institute of Chicago. As I mentioned, he saw the Grand Jatte picture. And he also noted in his diary, which is in the book, a black Conte crayon drawing by Seurat called Woman with a Muff from 1884. At any rate, Fitzgerald was to continue to use the pointillist technique when he plunged into abstraction after 1950, and that's something that we can see in the next two drawings.
Yeah, you could see that very clearly, especially in the one from 1954, which was, interestingly enough to me, I think even more abstract and geometric than the one from 56, which is a bit more biomorphic.
Yes, the 54, you know, you can look at Fitzgerald's entire career and see that elements of abstraction were always there, even the most seemingly figurative pictures. But in 1950, he embarked on what would be the last stage of his career, exploring abstraction. And one hesitates to call these non-objective drawings because there are always elements that link the drawings back to representation. In this case, with the abstract composition, for 1954, one could interpret the drawing as wavy figures or trees. And I compare it to a 1942 drawing that he made called Four Nudes in a Landscape from the Winnipeg Art Gallery's collection, where you see something of the same figural architecture that you get in the Concordia abstract. Interestingly enough, the 42 drawing was included in an exhibition in 1963 at the Winnipeg Art Gallery called A New Fitzgerald. And if you read the newspaper reports from the period, the public were shocked that the nude was a subject in Fitzgerald's repertoire. I think they were so used to seeing his prairie landscapes and that sort of work. But when Fitzgerald applied for a Guggenheim Scholarship in 1940, he suggested that he wanted to pursue further experimental work. This text is published in the book. And he may well have alluded to abstraction. My feeling is that he was influenced in part by Lorne Harris, who he visited in Vancouver during the summer trips to British Columbia after 1942. I don't think Brooker's abstracts from the 20s were a primary influence here. And then when you turn, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, no, carry on.
I was just thinking, when you then turn to the abstract drawing, the last one in the room, which it dates from January the 20th, 1954, again, it is a development of the pointillist technique. Some have likened his late abstracts to aerial views of the prairie. We know he sketched from aircraft on trips made to Toronto and Mexico in the 50s. Some have also likened his late work to Russian constructivism, but I'm not inclined to go in that direction, particularly he never cited those artists as an influence. The late drawings seem to me very much about balance and rhythms of line and pattern that he found in nature. For example, there's a drawing called Study for Autumn Sonata, which was from around the same time. created from his observation of falling leaves. And I think all of his work is ultimately based on what he saw. And, you know, there's that expression, to see is to think. And I think that in many ways, Fitzgerald's work is a living embodiment of that phrase.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. That kind of made me think again of the exceptionality of an artist from the first half of the 20th century who produced a significant body of writings, which, as you say, you don't see so much, especially in the case of somebody working, in rural Canada, who had an 8th grade education, but is actually so articulate. And I think that to draw is to think is such a nice phrase for sort of how Fitzgerald developed his own sort of intelligence visually and as a writer. Yes,
indeed. Yeah, he's an amazing artist, and I'm never, I've been working on him for some years now, and he never gets tired. There are always so many things to discover about him, and works are always coming forth that I've never seen before. That people get in touch with me, or they're coming up for auction or whatever, and it's almost inexhaustible with an artist like Fitzgerald. He really was very special.
I couldn't agree more. And that's, I think, actually all the time we have today. But it was such a pleasure to speak with you. So thank you again so much for joining us today. I hope you
Thank you, Saelan. And,
have a wonderful day. And I hope you can hear the applause in the room.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Saelan. Thank you both for participating in that. Go ahead.
Thank the audience as well. Thank you.
And our audience, yes. No, this is fantastic. I really appreciate you both coming together for this conversation. Just to let you know, we're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but this conversation remains available on our YouTube channel. Of course, you're going to like it and share it. That just goes without saying. And please stick around. There's going to be some more events this afternoon as a part of Volume, and we'll see you there. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks again, Michael.
Thank you.
Bye.
All the best. Thank you.